بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Welcome to Fiqh al-Muamalat online classes, and today's topics is basically a Sighah, or the statement of the contract or the expression of the contract. Where we'll be covering the offer and acceptance and the conditions pertaining to each one of them. I have to highlight here that this is a very important pillar as well, especially in the view of the Hanafi school of law, because in the view of the Hanafi, from their perspective, the contract has only one pillar, which is the Sighah, which is the statement of the contract, which is the ijab and qabul, or the offer and acceptance. And the other pillars just follow as a result of fulfillments of this specific pillar. Because the offer and the acceptance is the only one that express your consent and confirmations and acceptance to conclude this contract. So it is an expression of what's so-called the element of taradi, meaning consent, that you are okay to carry on with these transactions as a result of the communications that has been expressed by two parties in a form of offer and acceptance. But of course, in the view of the majority of the scholars, the view that the contract has three pillars, as mentioned before: price and goods, offer and acceptance, and buyers and sellers. Let's start by defining the offer and acceptance. And here actually there are two different views. We don't want to go actually in a kind of debate and diversity of the school of law to avoid confusing the audience, but just some of the points that may need to be highlighted, because it's useful, because it creates a positive diversity that possibly give you selections that may suit the structuring and the designing of your product according to one of the few that it could be relevant. We started with the Hanafi school of law. They said that offer, or the ijab, is basically means what is proposed first by one of the two contracting party, indicating his intention to go in the contract. So the offer is, in the view of the Hanafi, primary actions, the first action that has been done, regardless whether you are a buyer or a seller. Whereby the acceptance, or the qabul, means what is stated secondly by the other party following an offer, expressing his or her consent to the offer. So as you can see, the Hanafi determine the offer and the acceptance by first action and secondary action, meaning the primary actions is the offer, the secondary actions is the acceptance, regardless whether you are a buyer or a seller. That's the definitions of the Hanafi. On the other hand, the definition of the majority of the scholars, they define the offer or the ijab. It is means what is proposed by the one who transferred the ownership, meaning the one who will transfer the ownership, or in other words, in the sales, is the sellers. So the offer is always associated with the seller. Whereby the acceptance of the qabul, it means what is stated by the one to whom the ownership to be transferred, which is the buyer. So as you can see, the offer is associated with seller, and the acceptance is associated with the buyer. Whereby the Hanafi, offer is determined by first primary actions, whereby the acceptance is determined by the secondary actions. So that's the view of the different school of law in defining what is the offer and what is the acceptance. But in general, offer and acceptance are issued by two contracting parties with the intentions to conclude the contract whereby someone, in the case of sale, someone will claim the consideration or the price and the other one will claim the ownership of the goods through free consent after all the terms and conditions have been fulfilled. Let's describe the general requirements of the Sighah, then we'll try to zoom one by one. There are 4 general requirements. The first one, using the past tense in the forming the contract, and this is a recommendation. Number 2, the confirmations of the offer and the acceptance, meaning the offer confirmed the acceptance. And number 2, the clarity, meaning it should be clear, the clarity of the offer and acceptance. And the 4th one, the connectivity, meaning connecting the offer with the acceptance. These are the 4 important requirements in the contract, or precisely in the Sighah. And we'll try to discuss maybe the first one in this session, and the balance we keep it in the following session. Let's try to discuss the first point, which is use the past tense. Using the past tense in concluding transactions is recommended by the scholars. Like, for example, you say, I hereby sold this house to you. I hereby sold this mobile to you. So use the past tense because it has a connections with the intention. It shows that your intention is very clear and the intention has been confirmed, that you are basically engaging in a sales transactions whereby you are disposing permanently your asset to this person. Now, with regards to the a present or a future, scholars allow that provided the intention is clear, meaning you have intention to sell, because if there is no indication or no sign that you are having the intention to sell, the interpretation could be a kind of negotiations or what? Promise. For example, if you tell, I will buy this mobile from you. So the understanding of the seller that this could be a promise, or it could be a starting of negotiation. And as a result of that, you are not bound to reserve this asset to him because there is no sale is concluded. Unless he will say, for example, I will buy this from you, then at the same time he go to his wallet and try to get the cash, or he will ask you for a minute, give me a minute, I will go to the ATM machine to get the cash, or let me just call my wife or my son to bring me some cash because it's not enough. So what I'm trying to say is that the way they express the communication is in the future. It could be understood as a promise or as a negotiation, but it has been supported by some indication that he's willing to buy now, meaning his understanding is different than the tense or present tense or the connotations of the expression that has been issued by him. But recommended is to use the past tense to remove any potential ambiguity or confusions in the communications with the buyer or the seller. So that's the point number 1. Point number 2, the expressions typically is issued through verbal communication, meaning you speak. Well, I hereby sold this to you. I hereby accept this item with the said amount, for example. It's a verbal communication. But as you know, market has evolved, and there is a very huge evolutions in the offer and acceptance and the way that sales transaction is conducted. We have platforms, in the internet, and there is no direct communications, but it is presented in a different way, by clicking the button, by filling the information, sometimes using chat, sometimes video conference, sometimes phone calls, sometimes fax, sometimes chat, sometimes WhatsApp, and so on and so forth. So different mode of communication through Facebook platform, through a different platform of communication, including the social media as well. So those could be a venue that the communication could be expressed without speaking, without a verbal expression, which is the original position and status of the contract or the Sighah. But of course, scholars and Sharia allow that kind of form of communications, and actually there is a IOF standards regarding to the online transactions and the way that the offer and the acceptance is captured. We'll talk about it in these coming sessions related to a Sighah. The other point I would like to highlight is that in case the communications or the offer and acceptance have not been issued but transaction has been concluded. Of course, if it is a true writing, through signing, so that one is a reflections of the offer and acceptance. But in case transactions happened but there is no verbal communications or there is no other mode of communication, no writing, no speaking, nothing. This one normally we call it Fiqh al-Muamalat. Fiqh al-Muamalat or Fiqh al-Ta'ati is a kind of mode of transactions which is concluded in a silence mode. Example, you go to the shop, you pick up the item, you give the money and leave without communication. Of course, the majority, there is a kind of debate here a little bit among the scholars. Actually, the Shafi'i, they don't allow that typically, but the other later generation of scholars such as Al-Nawawi and Al-Baghawi, they allowed it. And as a result of that, basically, they are supporting the view of the majority of the scholars that Bay' al-Mu'atat, because it has a kind of maslaha and benefit to the and remove the restrictions of business dealing in the market. So it relies the circulations of wealth in the society as one of the maqasid al-Sharia. Some scholars that they say it is allowed only in cheap items, very, very cheap items, and the other scholars, like for example, Maliki, they allowed it for goods. Maybe you are a bit confused, what's the problem with that? I think you have to understand that this issue in the context of the few centuries back. Today, of course, there is a price listed there, there is a barcode, even there is no price, you take the item, you scan it, you will get the price. Sometimes you go to the internet, so all the prices are disclosed there. But here we are talking about places in kampung, for example, in isolated places, in very traditional market where there is no internet infrastructure, where there is no advanced pricing mechanism, where there is no barcode, back, in the past where there is no price. And as a result of that, how you can pick up an item and put the price and go without, at least asking about the price, without a negotiation of the price, without doing exactly how much it is in order to give the money. And sometimes commodity may change, especially in isolated places, whereby movement of the market in vegetables, agricultural item, and so on and so forth may have a kind of reflection. So that's basically the context of the debate. But of course, if you put the issue in today mechanism of pricing, the issue is not there, because if you go to 7-Eleven, for example, or any supermarket, the price is there. If you don't get it, you just scan it, the price, and go without having a communication with the person. And if the person scans it, so the price will be left presented on the screen, and that's your silence is a consent of that kind of acceptance. Anyway, this is just to highlight it, because this mu'atat could be somehow used to rectify some of the transactions where the parties didn't sign, meaning that transaction is concluded, but the guy or the buyers or the customer didn't sign. How you rectify from Sharia standpoint this kind of transaction? So normally it is fixed and rectified through Bay' al-Mu'atat, meaning there is a kind of acceptance between the two parties to conclude the contract via Mu'atat, even though the offer and acceptance have not been clearly expressed by both parties. I think we stop here at the first item, which is use the past tense as one of the requirements of the Sighah, and we will discuss the following requirements in the coming sessions. With that, thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.